Over 10,000 years ago, people started to discover how to cultivate crops and domesticate animals. This happened after the Ice Age that brought climate changes. Depending on where the people lived, would depend on if they had good or bad geographic luck. The people that were able to survive easier moved across the land in a latitude direction, because the temperatures stayed relatively the same year-round. The people who moved in a longitude direction followed the animals and did not have any other time to study or think about how to improve their ways. So for the ones who were able to think decided to bring the resources to them instead of following the pattern of resources that nature had provided them with. When people started to settle and study, they were able to come up with some new inventions that included the wheel and learning how to do smelting. With these advancements, the people were able to create things out of metal after melting it, like pens to keep the animals in, and later creating steel tools and items. All the new items that were made helped the future civilizations get started. After the invention of the wheel and the discovery of fire, the world began to evolve more quickly than before those new technologies were discovered. After the Civil War, the population began to increase in the Great Plains. There were no trees in the Great Plains, so the people had to use sod and densely packed soil and grass roofs to build with. There was also no water, because the temperatures were so high in the 100-degree Fahrenheit range. On the plains, so there had to be more than 100 feet of wells dug. Then shortly after the population growth in the Great Plains, the railroad was created and it reached the Great Plains by the 1860s. People who lived on the plains could claim up to 160 acres of land. By the 1860s, farmers began using plows, seed drills, reapers, and threshing machines. There was one type of cattle that could live on the Great Plains, which were called the Texas Longhorns. They descended from Spanish cattle. By 1865 there was about 5 million that roamed the Texas grasslands. Before the Civil War, ranchers did not round up cattle, and the prices for beef were low, and moving cattle to the eastern markets was not practical. The first long drive was in 1866, when ranchers began rounding up the Longhorns and drove about 260,000 to Missouri. They sold for 10 times the amount than if they were sold in Texas. Between 1867 and 1871, cowboys drove nearly 1.5 million heads of cattle up the Crisholm Trail from southern Texas. Herds could number anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 cattle. The way you knew which cattle belonged to you was by branding them on their hides with branding irons. The classical elites would and could consume more rare spices and other exotic foods. The obesity levels correlated with the lower class. There is also other forms of social identity that have been shaped by food habits. Gender roles derive largely from the division of labor in preparing food and the allocation of consumption within the family. Patriarchal societies assigned women the task of everyday feeding. The men, on the other hand, cooked and usually prepared high-status dishes, large cuts of roast meat, elaborate haute cuisine, or ritual food for the gods. Men also claimed the larger portions and left the less prized foods for the women and children. Shortly after the farming and human population increase, there was a sudden impact in the food production. If there was not enough food produced, then there would be a decrease in the human population because of starvation and malnutrition. So big food companies such as Tyson and most of the fast food places like Burger King bought and paid farmers to grow and harvest large amounts of produce in order to feed the growing population. Factory farming is referring to the process of raising livestock in confinement at a high stocking density and where a farm operates as a factory. The main product of the industrial farming is meat, milk and eggs, which are all produced for human consumption. However, there have been issues regarding whether factory farming is sustainable or not. Confinement at a high stocking density is one part of a systematic effort to produce the highest output at the lowest cost by relying on economies, modern machinery, biotechnology, and global trade. Confinement at high stocking density requires antibiotics and pesticides to minimize the spread of disease, seeing that the living conditions are so crowded and cramped. Antibiotics are also used to stimulate livestock growth by killing intestinal bacteria. There are differences in the way factory farming techniques are practiced around the world. There is a continuing debate over the benefits and risks of factory farming. These issues include the efficiency of food production, animal welfare,